What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Jimmy James 59. This is episode 2 of my more podcasty kind of series that I'm starting here, Ungarrisoned, where you get my ungarrisoned thoughts, opinions, feelings, stream of consciousness, ramblings, whatever it is, right, about some kind of topic relating to Age of Empires. We'll probably try to use this as a space for basically anything that doesn't fit into what you might call the meta of my content, which typically consists of build orders, analysis, and of course tier list. In the first episode of Ungarrisoned, which we did a couple weeks ago, right, I looked at the Dynasties of India's expansion and specifically at the two problem children, the Bengalis and the Dravidians. And to me, they share a similar weakness. And I wanted to look this week at the Gurjaras and the Hindustanis, because as the other two civilizations in the Dynasties of India, in terms of how they're perceived, it couldn't be further from where the Bengalis and the Dravidians are. Gurjaras and Hindustanis are pretty much seen being in the top 5 civilizations these days, and they both share a strength. These civilizations not only have an answer to basically any type of unit they can come across, but their answer is top tier. If you start off with the Gurjaras, they have probably top 2 camels in the game, maybe only behind the Hindustanis, and so they have a hard counter against knights there. They have the Shravamsha Rider, a light cavalry unit that absorbs projectiles, gives them a strong counter to archers. It's also a very effective raiding unit. I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a sec. Now, because these are stable units, right, what you'll typically see from your opponent to deal with it are either pikemen or monks. Now, with monks, you can mix in your own light cavalry, and that's not that difficult to deal with. Pikemen are a bit dicier because Gurjaras don't really have infantry they can make that's all that scalable from the barracks, right? You miss champions and blast furnace in the late game, and you also miss the pikeman upgrade in general. Now, the thing about Gurjaras, though, right, that gives them such a super counter here is at the castle, right? The Chakram Thrower, to me, is the most overpowered unit of the Gurjaras because it deals melee damage at range, but that damage passes through. The fact that the melee damage that it does is a bit lower in terms of the number, what it typically means is that the unit just winds up being very efficient in its damage distribution. You don't see nearly as much overkill like you do with some units. And when you get a group of Chakram Throwers in the field, it often seems like they're just in a bowling alley mowing down units. Now, it tends to be less effective against high HP units, heavy cavalry in particular. But again, hey, we know what Gurjaras do to heavy cavalry. And the Chakram Thrower is just really good against basically infantry of any type, and also even against siege units as well. They have a nice counter. And Gurjaras also get bombard cannons too. So the point here is, right, between the super camels, Shravamsha Riders, and Chakram Throwers, there's really not they have just a great counter for everything. There's really not a place where they're not just weak, but there's not really a place where they're average. They just have very strong options there. Now, the civilization also has a very, very good eco bonus, being able to garrison sheep and mills and get continuous food production, and also receiving 2 berry bushes in the Dark Age. And when you think about it, that winds up being a lot of extra food. Even if you just look at feudal age, right? You get about 24 food per minute from your sheep being in the mill. And so if you're in feudal age, from let's just say you open 20 pop scouts from 920, and let's say you have a pretty nice uptime and you get to the next age, let's just say around 20 minutes and 20 seconds, that's a clean 11 minutes. And so you'll get roughly 264 extra food. That is a lot of extra food. But I think the key to this bonus is that it's a passive income. And that's really what makes it strong, because you don't have villagers that are actually working on that, right? You have villagers that are doing other things to get that food. And so it's very strong. And then when you add in Casatrius, that reduces the food cost of all their military units, man, it just feels like the civilization has a pretty strong eco. Now, it's not that the civilization doesn't have any weaknesses, right? Not getting pikemen can be kind of rough. It means that you have to rely on camels as an answer to heavy cavalry. And so your opponent, right, knows that you're gonna have to do that. not having cavalry archers or arbalists and missing the last armor for archers means that if you have the need to go to range units, it's a bit more situational. And of course, I think missing knights is a deficiency because often in the mid-game, knights are really the raiding unit of choice. But the Chevauche Rider is pretty compelling. It doesn't have quite the damage of a knight, but it kind of does help you replace that role. So it's actually still pretty good. So I think the question with Gurjaras is what do we do about them? Because pretty much everyone agrees they need a nerf, and I have a few options for that here. I mean, the big one is the eco bonus, right? Right now, the eco bonus is a constant throughout the game. It has recently been changed to be conditional upon how many sheep you have in the mill in a way that is non-linear and is more subject to diminishing returns. I think one thing you can do is to reduce the amount of bonus you get in each age. So let's say you got 100% of the food bonus in the Dark Age, right? You got that 24 food if you have 8 sheep in the mill. Maybe you reduce it to 75% in Feudal, then 50% in Castle, etc., right? I think that reduction would make it a little bit more difficult for the civilization to turbo into ages and also afford insanely large armies that actually cost cheaper food. So that's one thing I think you could do. The other thing I think you have to think about is nerfing the Chevauche Rider. A lot of people have problems with the unit, rightfully so. And one possible answer to me is that I think you could make it have 0/0 armor. The rider I think is already shirtless, so it's not really wearing anything. It's kind of make it more of that. Make it more of a really light cavalry unit, and so even if you maybe give it a little melee armor or something, as long as it had 0 pierce armor, right? That would mean that when that absorption bar got depleted, you're in a really difficult spot. I think that would help balance out the unit a bit. You would really need to have a lot of them to snowball fights, and that would make it maybe more of a late game unit too, and not something that people could just open with early in Castle Age. Now if we take a look here at the Hindustanis and really think about this theme of being top tier against everything, right? Again, with the Hindustanis, right, we have a civ that again probably has arguably the best camels in the game, and because they attack faster, right, they actually do better against non-cavalry units like even eagle warriors, for instance. Now to deal with archers, you have the Gulam, which is kind of a mix between a Huskarl and an eagle warrior, though it was nerfed recently with some hit point reduction because it was just a little bit too strong against other infantry, particularly the longswordsmen in the mid-game as well as the eagles. It is nevertheless a great unit against crossbows still. And because it does pass-through damage in addition to its bonus damage, it really makes life difficult for archer units which tend to bunch up together on a small tile or group of tiles. Now, Hindustanis have a different profile than the Gurjaras, because the thing about Gurjaras, right, is their counters to knights and crossbows come from the stables. But from the Hindustanis, they come from a stable and the archery range. So, whereas Gurjaras can really immediately deal with a crossbow opening by switching between, right? If you're making camels, right, you can switch really easily without having to make a building to the Chevauche Rider. Hindustanis, it can take you a little bit longer to get to Gulams, and you really have to kind of plan that out. However, right, because the Gulam is a unit that's still pretty effective against the spear line, then this means that massing pikemen isn't an all-out counter to both of the Hindustanis units that counter knights and crossbows, whereas pikemen should counter both of the Gurjara units that are strong against cavalry and archers respectively. And so an opponent can go into pikes to counter camels. If the Hindustani player can switch to the Gulam, you have a good counter there. But it's harder for the Hindustani player to get there, even though it's a little more versatile. So there's a trade-off. Now, when it comes to going against infantry, the Hindustanis have a really nice counter with hand cannoneers that have, +1 melee and pierce armor respectively, and then +2 range with the surprisingly affordable Shaitani tech. And this makes infantry a really tough sell because you have a lot of range and armor on these bad boys. So again, like Gurjaras, we have some great counters against basically all 3 unit classes in the game. And you can stack on top of this, the Hindustanis do get pretty reasonable cav archers, right? You're only missing Parthian tactics, which the civilization used to have. And you also get good bombard cannons. Both of the civs get the siege elephant, which is a really fantastic unit as well. So you have great units here, and then like the Gurjaras, you get a really good food eco bonus because you save food on villagers. Again, this is a very passive bonus. You just rack up your savings, and so you save a similar amount of food, say in the feudal age, if you're doing sort of a similar some sort of build. Like a 20 pop scouts, and you have a decent uptime into castle age. You're still going to get about 220, 230 or so food and savings, or if you do the math on it. So really good. But the thing with Hindustanis, though, right, is that you get into castle age, and then you're saving even more resources because villagers are getting cheaper. You're typically making more villagers because you're on multiple town centers. So this bonus gets really strong as the game goes on. And the Hindustanis, as a result, I think, are just a very good civilization. Now, they've had some nerfs recently, right? They lost access to the halberdier, and that really nerfs their ability to pair a trash unit with their hand cannoneers to deal with heavy cavalry. So that's a nerf. And I don't think it's a bad nerf. I think nerfing the Gulam was probably a bit more impactful because now it's a unit that's a little bit more typecast as an anti-archer unit, and I do think the civilization needed something like that. Now, I think a lot of folks argue that Gurjaras are in desperate need of a nerf, and I think I agree with that. Hindustanis, after their nerf in the last patch, I think are a lot closer to being a more balanced civ. The truth is that even before the Dynasties of India expansion came out, when the civilization was known as the Indians, they had a very high win rate. Spirit of the Law, shout out to him, right, ranked them as the most underrated civ in the game based on their win rate versus their play rate, and they were a very popular pick in the King of the Desert 4 tournament, right, from a year or so ago. Now, you always remember that tourney had bans, and so part of their popularity in seeing the field was the fact that there were some civilizations being banned before them, but still, they were like right next in line. And so they were a popular pick there. And it is worth noting that lacking knights, I think, is a bit more troublesome for Hindustanis than Gurjaras, because the Gurjaras have a really nice raiding unit that they can idle town centers with, can fight under town centers, and Gurjaras can also make chakram throwers in the castle age even as well. Whereas Hindustanis, you don't really have that raiding unit that can fight under town centers in the mid game. And, maybe Gulam can kind of do that a bit, but you have to get to a castle to get to them. So it's a little bit tough. Now, I think Hindustanis compensate for that a bit by having a tech tree that's just a bit more versatile, and their infantry is just a bit more mediocre as opposed to Gurjaras, which is just poor infantry. So I think the Hindustanis, right, all in all, are a lot closer to being complete than the Gurjaras. Now, I will say, personally, I miss the days when this civilization had fully upgraded cav archers. I felt like that was crucial to a lot of the strategies that we saw, and just a lot of the gameplay. And to me, the identity of the civilization really, really changed in a way that the mantle of that hasn't been taken on by any of the other civilizations. In fact, the other Indian subcontinental civilizations don't even get cavalry archers. So it really is kind of up to the Hindustanis to keep that identity, and now it's really built more around gunpowder. And while I think that's fine, having 2 bonuses for the hand cannoneers just feels to me like it's a bit redundant. I would rather see Bengalis or Dravidians be able to get hand cannoneers and get one of those bonuses somehow, and see how that affects those, one of those civs that really, really struggles. Now, I will say, I used to be a broken record about Hindustanis not receiving Parthian tactics because I really love the fully upgraded cav archers. But I read an interesting article recently that claimed that there is almost no record of the Parthian shot being used in medieval Indian armies, right? And there really isn't any evidence of it until I think about the 16th century. It's a really cool article. I may put a link to it in the description below. And I read that article and I thought, well, I think that based on the historical accuracy of it, I have to suspend formally my participation in the campaign to restore Parthian tactics to the civilization if they never really used it. However, mounted archers were still a really important part of the armies in the region. And so I would like to see if I could make a change to this civ, I would love to see one of the hand cannon bonuses swapped out for some kind of cav archer bonus. One reason that historians think that medieval Indian armies did not use the Parthian shot was because it may have been considered as cowardly and dishonorable, right? And the armies of that region tended to fight in a more sort of linear style, and maybe it went up against some cultural beliefs to fight in a way where you're feinting from an opponent. And if we could give them a cav archer bonus that somehow reflected the idea of bravery and armor and a willingness to take fights, as the only civilization of those civs that has access to the cavalry archer, I think it should be a more special unit. I mean, their cav archers are the same as like Spanish and Lithuanians, and that just doesn't seem right to me. So I could see something like maybe extra melee armor being a possible bonus for their cav archers, because it could kind of emphasize their the bravery that they might have in the face of danger. You might have cav archers, right? Cav archers take a lot of bonus damage from a lot of different units, right? Maybe a tech they could research in Imperial Age to reduce that a little bit. I don't know. There's probably something you could do. Heck, I even think a tech to give them, say, like +1 melee and +1 pierce armor. That would be really interesting, right? So you could give the gunpowder version of that to Dravidians or Bengalis, and then give Hindustanis, right? The cav archers get +1 melee and +1 pierce armor. And that would, basically get them up to the melee armor of a typical, a generically fully upgraded cav archer, but then also give them 5 pierce armor instead of 6. And that would be really interesting. I would be really interested to see how a 5 pierce armor cav archer would function, because when it comes to pierce armor, any little bit you can get is really strong. So I don't know. I think there's something there that could be done, but I'm just not sure what it is. But I know that, at least for me, I'd like to see cav archers be a bit more of the identity of the civ. But if the developers want to talk to me about it, we can discuss my consultant fees at a later date. But anyways, that's going to be it for this video. I'm curious what you all think about the Gurjaras and the Hindustanis, given how much discussion there has been about them since they came out, right? Are they overpowered? Are they in a decent spot? I mean, that's something you could argue, that maybe we just haven't figured out how to deal with a civilization like the Gurjaras, right? Maybe there's just still we need to learn about them. That being said, right, I'm Jimmy James 59. If you like this kind of video, definitely let me know in the comments. I'm going to keep this series going for a bit, as long as people seem to be enjoying it, and I certainly enjoyed getting on here and rapping a bit. But I'll go ahead and sign off, and I'll see you guys out there in the lab. Peace.